On November 7, 2014, at 12:45 a.m., a paranormal investigator named Robert Lorson Jr. was found bleeding on the floor of a rental house in Villisca, Iowa. He had stabbed himself in the chest. The blade had punctured his lung. When paramedics arrived, he was conscious, gasping for air, his shirt soaked red. He survived. But what he told police afterward was more disturbing than the wound itself. Robert claimed he didn't remember doing it. He said he felt compelled, that something had moved through him, used his hands, turned the knife inward. The paramedic who treated him reportedly said Robert kept repeating phrases about staying with the children in the house. That house, where 8 people were murdered in 1912, 6 of them children, is coming later on this list, and it's horrific. But here's what makes that house different from every other murder site in America. That house in Iowa had been standing for 102 years when Robert walked in, and for decades before it became a museum, families rented it, raised kids in it, slept in the rooms where the murders happened. If anything occurred during those years, it wasn't reported publicly or documented. No voices, no apparitions, no compulsions to violence. Then, in the 1990s, it became a museum. Tourists arrived, investigators brought equipment, thousands of people walked through expecting to encounter the dead. And that's when the phenomena began. We'll return to that Iowa farmhouse and the question of whether expectation itself can wake the dead. We begin in California with one of the strangest structures ever built in this country, a mansion so architecturally impossible that it has baffled investigators for a century.
The Winchester Mystery House sits at the edge of San Jose, California, a Victorian mansion so architecturally strange that it has been called one of the most investigated paranormal locations on the West Coast. Most people assume the photographs are edited the first time they see them. 161 rooms, staircases that climb directly into sealed ceilings, doors that open onto 30-foot drops, hallways that fold back on themselves and end at blank walls. Paranormal investigators have called it one of the most disorienting locations they have ever worked, a building that appears to have been designed not for the living, but for something else entirely. Staff will not go into the sealed wings alone. Security guards have learned not to follow the piano music, and the figure in Victorian black that walks the upper hallways has been described by so many employees across so many decades that management no longer treats the reports as unusual. But what makes the Winchester Mystery House different from every other haunted location in America is not just what people report inside it, it's what the building looks like, in the fact that no one has ever been able to explain why it was built this way. 38 years of continuous, obsessive, never-ending construction. In 1884, Sarah Winchester, widow of William Wirt Winchester, heir to the Winchester rifle fortune, purchased an unfinished 8-room farmhouse in the Santa Clara Valley and began construction. She built continuously for the next 38 years, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, workers in rotating shifts. The hammering never stopped. But before the house, there was the grief. In 1866, Sarah's infant daughter, Annie, died just weeks after birth. In 1881, her husband, William, died of tuberculosis. She was left with $20 million and a 50% stake in Winchester Repeating Arms, and no one left to build anything for. 3 years after burying William, she bought the farmhouse, and the hammering began. Sarah Winchester never explained why the hammering couldn't stop. She supervised construction directly, made every architectural decision herself, and ensured the work continued around the clock. Workers who left accounts describe a woman who knew exactly what she was building. She just never told them what for. And throughout the Winchester Mystery House, the number 13 runs like a signature. 13 bathrooms, 13 steps on specific staircases, 13 windows in certain rooms, 13 hooks in the closets. It repeats across the entire structure, not randomly, but deliberately built in, designed. Then came the earthquake. On April 18, 1906, the San Francisco earthquake struck. The top 3 floors collapsed, entire sections were destroyed. Sarah became increasingly anxious afterward, convinced the disaster had been connected to her work. She sealed off the ruins rather than remove them. She kept building around the damage, new rooms abutting rubble, hallways terminating its sealed walls, stairs climbing into blocked ceilings. The maze that baffles investigators today was not built to confuse ghosts. It was built around a collapse she could not bring herself to fully remove. When she died in September 1922, workers put down their tools mid-project, nails half-hammered, rooms half-painted. The construction records are incomplete. What happened to the laborers who built this structure for 38 years is largely unrecorded. The mansion was abandoned exactly as it stood. But here's what happens at the Winchester Mystery House now. Employees describe the sound of construction before the museum opens, wheelbarrows being pushed through empty hallways, metal wheels creaking on hardwood, the frame rattling as the sound moves through sealed, unfinished wings. When staff follow it, they find empty corridors. Silence. Then the sound returns the next morning. Night security guards have reported piano music coming from the grand ballroom long after closing. Soft, melancholic, fragmentary. The music stops the instant they enter. The instruments are roped off, untouched. Multiple employees across multiple decades have independently described seeing a small, elderly woman in Victorian black walking the halls with purpose, turning corners, passing through locked doors, moving through walls that weren't there when she was alive. 4 feet, 10 inches, Sarah Winchester's documented height. When staff follow her, she vanishes, but the door she just passed through is still swinging. But the most reported detail at the Winchester Mystery House is not a sound or a figure. It is a feeling. Employees and visitors in the sealed wings describe the persistent, specific sensation of being observed from inside the walls, not from a doorway, not from a corner, but from behind the plaster itself, from inside the structure, as though whatever occupies this house is not walking through it, but living inside it, the way grief lived inside the woman who built it. 38 years of hammering, 13 repeated in every room, a maze sealed around its own collapse. Construction stopped in 1922. The feeling has never stopped.
Sarah Winchester built for 38 years and never explained why. The hammering couldn't stop. She left the house mid-sentence, tools down, rooms unfinished. The grief still counted into every wall. 400 miles south, in San Diego, another house carries a different kind of weight. The man who built it knew exactly what the ground had held before the first brick was laid. He had watched a man die there, watched him strangle slowly from a gallows. 5 years later, he moved his family onto that same ground.
The Whaley House stands in Old Town San Diego, a 2-story Greek revival built in 1857 on a piece of ground that had already watched a man die and officially recognized as one of the most haunted houses in America, not by ghost hunters, by the U.S. Commerce Department, only one of 2 California properties to carry that federal designation. 60 years of identical reports from unrelated witnesses, the same footsteps in the same archway, the same figure in the same window, the same infant crying from the same upstairs room. Whatever is inside this house does not vary, but to understand what occupies the Whaley House, you have to start with what the ground held before it existed. On September 18, 1852, a man named James Robinson, known throughout Old Town San Diego as Yankee Jim, was hanged from a gallows on a rise of ground at the center of what was then the busiest part of town. He had been convicted of attempting to steal a boat. The execution was botched. The drop was too short. Yankee Jim strangled slowly, feet kicking, body swinging for long minutes before he suffocated. The crowd watched. Among them stood a young man named Thomas Whaley, 24 years old. And 5 years later, in 1857, Thomas purchased that exact piece of land and built his family home directly over where the gallows had stood. Land was cheap where executions happened. Thomas made a financial calculation and moved his wife and children onto the site of what he had witnessed. The Whaley house became the family's residence, and between 1869 and 1871, it served as the San Diego County Courthouse. But the property also absorbed the family's grief. Thomas Whaley Jr. died in 1858, just 18 months old. On August 18, 1885, the Whaley's daughter Violet shot herself in the chest in an outbuilding on the property. She was 22. Her marriage had failed. She had come home. In 1960, the Whaley house became a museum, and here's what has never stopped happening inside it. The footsteps concentrate in the archway at the top of the stairs, precisely where the gallows stood in 1852. Visitors describe that location as unnaturally cold, not the ambient cool of an old building, cold that is directional, coming from something rather than caused by air. Guests have also reported what sounds like an infant crying from the upstairs bedrooms, where Thomas Jr. spent his brief life, described by visitors who arrived with no knowledge of the child's death and had to be told afterward why what they heard made sense. In the parlor, visitors have seen a chair rocking without breeze or vibration, and sometimes when the rocking stops, the cushion holds an indentation as though someone is sitting there. In the section that once served as Thomas Whaley's general store, visitors describe a man behind the counter, middle-aged, dark vest, white shirt, sleeves rolled, so solidly present that people approach him believing he is a museum employee. He stands with his hands on the counter, waiting. When people get close, he is gone. But the most photographed apparition at the Whaley house is Violet. Always the same window, always perfectly still, always looking out over the place where Yankee Jim died. Tourists have photographed her without knowing to look for her. They see her in the window, take the picture, and only later realize no one was supposed to be there. When staff check the room, it is empty. The chair still rocks in the parlor. The footsteps still concentrate at the top of the stairs, and Violet still stands in her window. 60 years of identical reports. The Whaley house absorbed an execution, a courthouse, an infant death, and a suicide. It has never let any of them go.
Thomas Whaley knew what his land had held. The death was in the record before the first stone was laid. But on Long Island, there was no such warning. What happened inside a Dutch colonial on a quiet canal became the most famous haunted house story in American history, not because the haunting was proven, but because it has never been disproven. 6 people were murdered there in a single night. 13 months later, a new family moved in. They lasted 28 days.
The Amityville Horror House stands at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, a Dutch colonial on a quiet residential canal that has been called America's most infamous haunted address. It has been investigated more than any other private residence in the United States, inspiring dozens of books, films, and documentaries across 5 decades. No one has resolved it. No haunted house has produced a story that lasted 50 years without resolution, with the people who lived it maintaining their account until they died. And no haunted house has a basement room that multiple unrelated owners, people who moved in decades later, people who had never heard the Lutz story, have independently described producing the same smell.
like old blood. What is not in dispute, on November 13, 1974, at approximately 3:15 in the morning, 6 people were shot to death in their beds at 112 Ocean Avenue. All were found face down. None had struggled. None had woken. Neighbors reported hearing nothing. Ronald decaying Jr., the eldest son, was convicted of all 6 murders. Court records document years of dysfunction within the household before the murders. Testimony described violence and conflict. After his arrest, DeFeo told a psychiatrist that the house held his father's presence even when his father was absent, that he heard him screaming. At trial, DeFeo's defense presented testimony that Ronald had heard voices inside the house, voices that told him to kill his family, that the house hadn't just held his father's anger, that it had spoken to him directly, instructed him. The jury convicted him regardless, but the voices are in the trial record. The violence that ended 6 lives in a single night had been building inside those walls for years. 13 months later, George and Kathy Lutz moved in with Kathy's 3 children. The house was cheap. The realtor disclosed its history. The Lutzes said they could handle it. They had the house blessed by a priest before moving in. Father Ralph Pecoraro reported that when he entered the sewing room, a voice, clear, male, commanding, told him to get out. He developed blisters on his hands that same day. His car broke down repeatedly on the drive home. He refused to return and told the Lutzes to leave the house alone. The Lutzes moved in anyway. They left 28 days. And here's what the Lutzes reported. The Lutz account is the most disputed element of the Amityville horror house's history. What follows is their testimony, reported consistently across decades, never legally disproven, and never independently verified. George reported waking every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the documented time of the DeFeo murders. He reported being drawn repeatedly to the basement, where he claimed to find a small room behind a bookcase, 4 feet by 5 feet, red walls, dirt floor, not on any blueprint. He described it as always cold in a way that hurt. He said it smelled of rot and sulfur. The room exists. It is a well cover for old plumbing. Multiple subsequent owners have confirmed its presence. And here is the one element of the Amityville account that has produced consistent, independent corroboration. Several owners who moved in with no knowledge of the Lutz story have reported a metallic, rotting smell appearing and vanishing in that corner without identifiable source. They called plumbers. No source was found. Some described it as smelling like old blood. That smell, not the levitation, not the flies, not the priest's account, is the one detail no one has explained away. Father Pecораro's account, the voice in the sewing room, the blisters, the car breakdowns, remains his testimony alone. He refused to return to the house and declined most interviews. Kathy reported waking with deep red welts across her torso and arms, 4 parallel lines in locations she could not reach herself. George photographed them. The photographs still exist. What produced them has never been established. In the sewing room, the same room where the priest had been told to leave, the Lutzes reported finding the windows packed with black flies in December, thousands of them, pressed against the glass in the dead of a New York winter when no flies should have existed anywhere inside that house. On the night of January 14, 1976, George reported waking to find Kathy levitating 2 feet above the bed, her skin ice cold to the touch, no memory of it when she came down. They packed that night. They left their belongings behind. The story became a best-selling book and blockbuster film. Investigators found inconsistencies. DeFeo's defense attorney later claimed he and the Lutzes fabricated the haunting account together over wine. The family that purchased the Amityville horror house after the Lutzes lived there years and reported nothing unusual. The Lutzes passed polygraph tests. Kathy maintained the account until her death in 2004. George lived 30 more years and never reported another haunting anywhere he lived. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue still stands. Current owners live there privately and refuse interviews. but the red room remains in the basement, and when new owners move in without knowing the history, some eventually call plumbers about the smell. Same corner, same metallic rot, rising from the same small room with red walls. The smell is the one thing that keeps coming back.
The Amityville house held 6 murders, and one family's account, disputed at every level, unresolved after 50 years. But in Fall River, Massachusetts, there's a house where 2 people were bludgeoned to death with a hatchet on a sweltering August morning, and the case was never solved. And here's what makes it different from every other murder site on this list. This house doesn't just remember the violence, it remembers the day that built toward it, the spoiled meat, the locked windows, the heat, the sickness, as though what soaked into the walls wasn't the murders themselves, but the specific unbearable mourning that preceded them.
The Lizzie Borden house sits on 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, a plain Greek revival that paranormal investigators consistently rank among the most persistently active haunted locations in New England. It looks nothing like what its reputation would suggest. No broken windows, no overgrown yard. It is well-maintained, freshly painted, and open for overnight guests. It is now a bed and breakfast. Guests pay to sleep in the room where Abby Borden was struck 19 times with a hatchet while making the bed. They pay to eat breakfast in the dining room where the family consumed 3-day-old mutton the morning 2 of them were killed. They pay for the experience of waking at 2 a.m. to the sensation of someone sitting on the edge of the mattress, the springs compressing, the weight shifting, and finding no one there when the light comes on. But what makes the Lizzie Borden house different is that it doesn't just remember the violence, it remembers the day before. On August 4, 1892, Andrew Borden was struck 10 to 11 times with a hatchet while napping on the sitting room sofa. Abby Borden had already been struck 18 to 19 times while making the bed in the upstairs guest room. The medical examiner determined she died approximately 90 minutes before Andrew. 2 separate attacks inside the same house over the course of a single morning. Lizzie Borden, Andrew's 32-year-old daughter, was arrested, tried, and acquitted. The jury deliberated for approximately 90 minutes. The case is never solved. Emma Borden, Lizzie's sister, lived with her for 13 years after the acquittal. Around 1905, she moved out without explanation. They became estranged and never reconciled. When they died within 9 days of each other in June 1927, neither had spoken to the other in over 2 decades. Emma knew something. She just never told anyone what. 2 days before the murders, Lizzie walked into a drugstore on Columbia Street and asked the pharmacist, Eli Bentz, to sell her prussic acid, hydrogen cyanide. She said she needed it to clean a fur cape. Bentz refused to sell it without a prescription. A second clerk witnessed the exchange. Both men were prepared to testify at trial. The judge ultimately ruled the testimony inadmissible. The jury never heard it. The day before the murders, Abby Borden told the maid Bridget Sullivan that she had received a note calling her to visit a sick friend. That was why she was upstairs making the guest room bed when she was killed. That note was never found. No sick friend was ever identified. No one ever came forward to say they sent it. The night before the murders, the family was served leftover mutton in sweltering August heat. No refrigeration. The meat had turned. By morning, everyone inside was sick. The maid, Bridget Sullivan, testified she spent the morning vomiting outside. Lizzie claimed she was too ill to eat. Andrew kept the windows locked against burglars. No cross-ventilation. Thick air, reeking of illness and rot. Everyone inside was sick, trapped, and suffocating. And then the hatchet came down. But here's what guests report now at the Lizzie Borden house. The smell arrives first. Rotting food, spoiled meat, the sour stench of illness appearing suddenly in the dining room and kitchen, overwhelming, then gone. These reports have come from guests who booked rooms without knowing the food poisoning history. They smell it and report it. They are told afterward what they smelled. In the guest room where Abby died, the reports of weight on the mattress edge have accumulated from enough independent guests that the bed itself has become one of the most documented locations in the house. The springs compressing, the mattress indenting. The light comes on and nothing is there. Others describe seeing a heavy-set woman in a plain dress at the foot of the bed, solid and gone when they blink. In the sitting room where Andrew died, visitors describe pressure in the chest, difficulty breathing, the sensation of being held down. And in Lizzie's old room, a shadow in the corner, dense, dark. Those who have encountered it report the same detail, the sense of something long and thin held against its shoulder. The light comes on, the corner is empty, but it stays cold. In the basement, staff still describe the smell of burning fabric rising from the old stove, acrid, brief, sourceless. The stove hasn't functioned since the 1920s. 3 days after the murders, Lizzie's neighbors saw her burning a dress down there. The weapon was never found, but the corner in Lizzie's room still holds something, and the stove in the Lizzie Borden house still remembers what she burned.
Before the next house, if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. This channel goes deeper than the tours, deeper than the films, deeper than anything else in this space. Hit subscribe. It takes 2 seconds. The Lizzie Borden house has been producing reports almost since the murders themselves, a century of accumulated testimony, with the dining room and guest bedroom at its center. But in the Midwest, there's a house where the question isn't just what happened there. The question is what turned it on. 8 people were murdered there in 1912, 6 of them children. For 80 years after, the house was simply a house. Families lived in it. Children slept in the rooms where the bodies were found. Not one documented report. Then it became a museum. Then thousands arrived expecting it to be haunted, and the children started speaking. This is the house from the opening, the house where Robert Lorson stabbed himself in the chest.
The Villisca Axe Murder House stands on East 2nd Street in Villisca, Iowa, a white clapboard farmhouse that paranormal investigators have called the most psychologically disturbing location in the United States and one of the most genuinely unexplained. From the street, it is indistinguishable from 100 others in the surrounding countryside. Nothing marks it as different from any other house in any other quiet Midwestern town. And yet what happened here, and what did not happen here for 80 years afterward, is unlike anything else on this list. 8 people were murdered inside in a single night, 6 of them children. And for 8 decades afterward, the Villisca Axe Murder House was simply a house. Then it became a museum. Then thousands arrived expecting the dead to speak, and the dead answered. That silence and what broke it is what makes this house unlike any other location on this list, and it is why in 2014 a man walked in and stabbed himself in the chest. On June 10, 1912, a neighbor noticed the Moore house was unusually quiet. She contacted Josiah Moore's brother, who entered and found 8 people dead. Josiah Moore, age 43, his wife, Sarah, age 39, their 4 children, Herman, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5, and 2 visiting girls, Lena Stillinger, 12, and her sister, Ina, 8, who had stayed the night after a church function. All 8 had been killed with an axe while they slept. The killer had covered each victim's face with cloth after death. The windows had been covered, the mirrors had been covered. A 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon of unknown origin was found on the floor. The killer had carried a kerosene lamp through each room, examining the bodies after death. In the attic, there is a closet next to the chimney. The interior shows scratch marks. Investigators believe the killer hid there for hours before the family returned home, waiting in the dark while they ate dinner, said their prayers, and the children fell asleep. No one in the neighborhood reported hearing anything. The investigation ran for years. The primary suspect who emerged was a traveling evangelist named Reverend Lynn George Kelly, a man who had attended the exact same church function as the Moore children on the night of the murders. He was in Villisca that night. He left on an early train the next morning before the bodies were discovered. Kelly was tried twice. The first trial ended in a hung jury. The second ended in acquittal. He was never convicted. The murders have never been solved. For the decades that followed, the house was rented. Families raised children inside it. If anything unusual occurred during those years, it was not publicly reported or documented anywhere. In 1994, the Villisca Axe murder house was purchased and converted into a museum. Tours began. Overnight stays became available. Thousands walked through with equipment and expectation. The children started speaking. And here's what investigators and guests report. The voices concentrate in the bedroom where Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul died. Guest accounts have described a child's voice saying, "We're still here," clearly enough that people have searched the house for living children before accepting no children were present. On recorded investigations, when investigators have asked, "Are Lena and Ina here?" responses have been reported to be, "We want to go home," occurring often enough in consistent enough form that it has become the Villisca Axe murder house's signature documented phenomenon. Footsteps in the attic, heavy, deliberate, slow, have been reported by investigators who know the history and guests who don't. In the space where a man is believed to have waited in the dark for a family to fall asleep, people consistently report the sensation of being watched from corners they cannot see. In the parents' bedroom, guests describe waking to the presence of someone standing close to the bed. Others report slow, rhythmic breathing at close range when they are alone in the room. On November 7, 2014, just after midnight, Robert Lowerson entered the house and stabbed himself in the chest. He survived. According to news reports, he told police he felt compelled, that something had used his hands. Local reporting noted alcohol may have been involved, and Lowerson was charged with a misdemeanor. His account of compulsion is part of the documented record of this house. Here is what the Villisca case raises that no other case on this list. There is a theory in paranormal research called a tulpa, a thought form created by collective belief, the idea that enough accumulated expectation can produce what people came looking for. The Villisca timeline fits that theory precisely. 8 decades of silence, then phenomena beginning the moment thousands started arriving to encounter the dead. What the record does not resolve is whether the 1912 murders left something dormant that waited for an audience, or whether thousands of visitors brought their fear inside and painted it into existence one by one. The Villisca Axe murder house does not answer that question. And the fact that it doesn't, that the timeline fits both explanations with equal precision, may be the most disturbing thing about it. Every night, guests report waking to children whispering in the dark. Every night, footsteps climb the attic stairs and stop at the top. And the scratch marks in the closet of the Villisca Axe murder house have never been explained. Decades without documented reports. Then thousands arrived, and the children started speaking.
The Villisca house required an audience. It needed thousands of people to arrive expecting something before it started delivering. But in St. Louis, no one had to arrive expecting anything. No museum conversion, no overnight investigators with equipment, no tourism apparatus. The violence at the Lemp mansion came entirely from within, from one family, returning to the same walls across 4 decades, making the same choice one by one. 4 suicides, 3 of them inside these rooms, 1 note between all of them. And the brother who survived did so only by refusing to go back.
The Lemp Mansion stands at 332 DeMental Place in St. Louis, Missouri, a 33-room Victorian showplace that Life magazine named one of the 10 most haunted places in America, and that paranormal investigators consistently describe as unlike any other location they have worked. Built by one of the most powerful brewing families in American history, consumed by that same family across 4 decades. 4 suicides, 3 inside these walls, 1 note left between all of them. The last surviving brother was warned not to move back in. He moved back in anyway. He shot his dog first so she wouldn't be alone. Then he shot himself and left the only explanation any of them ever wrote. "In case I am found dead, blame it on no one but me." But to understand the Lemp mansion, you have to understand what the family was before it consumed them. Johann Adam Lemp arrived in St. Louis from Germany around 1838. He sold groceries, brewed lager in his basement, and within 2 decades had built the Western Brewery into one of the first large-scale lager operations in America. His son William J. Lemp expanded it into an industrial giant. By the 1870s, one of the largest breweries in St. Louis, competing directly with Anheuser-Busch. William purchased the mansion at 332 DeMental Place in 1876 and renovated it into a Victorian showplace. An underground tunnel connected the mansion directly to the brewery. Then, Frederick died. Frederick Lemp was William Sr.'s 4th son, 28 years old, chosen by his father to inherit the brewery. In December 1901, he died of heart failure. William Sr. never recovered. He withdrew from public life, stopped attending to the business, and descended into a grief his family watched and could not reach. And on the morning of February 13, 1904, William Sr. Lemp went to his bedroom in the Lemp mansion and shot himself in the head with a .38 caliber revolver. He left no note. When asked about his sister Elsa's suicide 2 years earlier, William Jr. had said, "That's the Lemp family for you." Elsa Lemp Wright, considered one of the wealthiest women in St. Louis at the time of her first marriage, had shot herself on March 20, 2020, 11 days after remarrying her estranged husband. She was 51. She left no note. Elsa died at her own home, not the mansion. Then Charles Lemp, William Sr.'s 3rd son, moved into the Lemp mansion in 1929. His brother Edwin tried to dissuade him. By family accounts, Edwin told Charles directly that living in the mansion was not healthy for him. Charles moved in anyway. He lived there alone for 20 years, reclusive, bitter, rarely leaving. But the suicides were not the only secret the Lemp mansion held.
Local historians and accounts of the Lemp family have described a child, allegedly William Jr.'s illegitimate son, who was born with Down syndrome and kept entirely out of public view inside the mansion walls. What is established, the child existed and lived inside the house. What is not established in any official record is his name, his burial, or the full circumstances of his death. He was given no public record. He made no appearances. He existed, by all accounts, only within those rooms, hidden from St. Louis society. He died young. Some accounts indicate he was buried on the property without formal documentation. In a family that controlled one of the most powerful brewing empires in the Midwest, this child was their most carefully kept secret. On May 10, 1949, Charles went to the basement and shot his dog. Then he went to his bedroom and shot himself in the head. He left the only note in the family's history: "In case I am found dead, blame it on no one but me." Edwin Lemp sold the mansion and never returned. He lived to 90. His final instruction to his caretaker was to destroy the family's entire art collection and all heirlooms, not sell them, destroy them, as though he wanted no object from that history to survive. The Lemp mansion became a boarding house. In 1975, it was purchased, restored, and opened as a restaurant and inn. And at the Lemp mansion today, in the office where William Jr. died,
Staff and guests described the persistent smell of cigar smoke, William Jr.'s documented habit, appearing without source in a room where no one has smoked. Papers left neat or found scattered. Drawers open unattended. In the bedroom where William Sr. died, investigators have documented reports of a single sharp sound late at night, described consistently as a gunshot. No origin, no weapon, no echo. But Charles Lemp is the most frequently reported presence. Guests and staff describe a gaunt, formally dressed man moving through the upper floor hallways, unhurried, alone, moving through rooms he clearly knows. Some accounts include the shapes of dogs moving at his feet. Charles shot his dog before he shot himself. He didn't want her to be alone. In the basement, where the tunnel entrance connects to the ruins of the old brewery, guests report cold air moving through sealed passages. The tunnel runs beneath the street. The brewery it once connected to was demolished decades ago. 4 suicides, 3 inside these walls, 1 note between them. And somewhere in the record of the Lemp mansion, a child no one was permitted to acknowledge. Edwin sold the mansion and lived to 90. He told his brother not to stay. The record suggests he was right.
The Lemp mansion's violence was entirely self-directed, a family that turned inward and kept turning until there was nothing left. The same house, the same rooms, the same choice made 4 times across 4 decades. But in Rhode Island, the violence is directed outward, at specific people, for reasons the phenomena themselves have never explained. A family moved in with no prior knowledge in 1970. 5 daughters, a fresh start on a farm. The house started on them the first night. But here's what makes this case different from everything else on this list. The children described warmth, comfort, being cared for. The mother described something that hated her. Same presence, same nights, 2 completely different experiences of the same entity, as though whatever lives in this farmhouse is still sorting the living into categories only it understands. This is number 1.
The Perron house sits on a rural road in Harrisville, Rhode Island, an Arnold-era farmhouse that paranormal investigators consider the most complex, sustained haunting ever documented in the United States, and the one case that has never produced a clean explanation. It has stood for over 2 centuries in a part of New England where the land carries history most people would rather not examine closely. It is number 1 on this list, not because of what it produced. Other houses here produced more violence, more deaths, more dramatic events. It is number 1 because of what it distinguished, because whatever inhabits the Perron house does not treat everyone the same. Children describe being tucked in at night by something they could not see, hair stroked, blankets smoothed, lullabies sung in empty rooms. But mothers describe being pushed downstairs. Same house, same entity, same nights, 2 completely different experiences, as though what occupies the Perron house is still caring for the children and still seeing the mothers as competition. No other location on this list shows that kind of internal logic. No other haunting has ever appeared to make decisions about the living. The Perrons were not the first family to leave. Before them, multiple families had lived in that farmhouse and fled. Andrea Perron's own account of the property's history documents a pattern of families arriving and departing under distress, tenants who left without full explanation, who stayed briefly and did not return. In December 1970, Roger and Carolyn Perron moved in with their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cindy, and April. According to the family's account, the house started on them the first night. Carolyn reported that something gripped her leg hard enough to leave marks. Within days, the family reported knocking in sets of 3 moving through the walls and floors, the smell of rotting flesh filling rooms and vanishing, objects rearranged overnight.
But the children described different experiences than Carolyn did. The children reported being tucked into bed, hair stroked, lullabies sung in empty rooms. Carolyn reported being pushed, scratched, slapped. She described feeling targeted, as though something in the house had identified her specifically and was working to drive her out. The Perron family researched the property's history and found a name. Bathsheba Sherman had lived on this land in the 1800s. What is documented, she existed, she lived here, she died in the 1880s. What is legend, passed through local oral tradition and never established in the historical record, is the rest. That neighbors called her a witch, that she murdered an infant in a ritual, that her death was a sudden, total, unexplained paralysis, her body locking rigid without cause. The Perron family found that legend and recognized something in it. Whether Bathsheba Sherman is the source of what occupies this house, or whether her name was simply the closest available explanation for something that preceded any name, is a question the record cannot answer. What the Perron accounts describe is not a figure of pure malice. They describe something maternal, children tucked in, lullabies sung to the living, but mothers pushed, mothers made to feel like intruders, as though whatever remained inside the Perron house was still trying to mother and could no longer distinguish the living from those it had already lost. And here's what happened next. After years of escalating experiences, Carolyn contacted Ed and Lorraine Warren, the investigators behind cases that became The Conjuring, the Amityville Horror, and Annabelle. Lorraine Warren conducted a séance. Andrea Perron, the eldest daughter, has been explicit on the public record. There was no exorcism. It was a séance that went very wrong. It was the most terrifying night of my life. By Andrea's account, Carolyn's voice changed immediately, dropping, aging. She began speaking in a language none of them recognized. Then, in Andrea's own words, her chair rose and she was thrown across the room. Roger Perron ended the séance. Carolyn came to with no memory of it. Andrea has said that after the séance, the major phenomena subsided. The family lived with what remained until they left in 1980. Andrea documented the family's decade in the house in a 3-volume memoir, House of Darkness, House of Light. Her account is the primary record of what happened there, detailed, internally consistent, unchanged across decades of public interviews. In 2019, Corey and Jennifer Heinzen purchased the Perron house. In interviews, they have described waking to knocking that moves through the walls in sets of 3, the same pattern the parents documented in the 1970s. Jennifer has described objects found moved overnight in rooms that had been closed. Both have described cold that is localized and directional in specific parts of the house, independent of the season. Neither went looking for a haunted house, they bought a farm. The basement stairs remain the most documented specific location. Carolyn reported being pushed there in the 1970s. The Heinzens and subsequent visitors described the same sensation at the same spot, force at the back, a sudden loss of balance, with enough consistency that it has become the single most corroborated physical claim in the property's recorded history. Guests still report being tucked in during the night by something unseen in the upstairs rooms. The lullabies still drift through the bedrooms, but the women who sleep in the mother's rooms wake with bruises they cannot explain, and the stairs wait at the bottom of the Perron house, cold, dark, still occupied by whatever decided decades ago which people in this house it would protect and which it would not.
7 houses, 7 addresses still standing in the public record, and one thing connecting them. What haunts these places chooses its targets. Mothers at the Perron house, a family the Lemp mansion kept calling back until there was no one left. A house in Amityville that absorbed a killer's rage for years before the murders and seemed to recognize it again when the wrong person moved in. The violence is not random, it selects. Some of these houses were silent for decades before they started speaking. Some began on the first night, and some cannot tell the difference between protecting the living and destroying them. The addresses are real, the reports continue,
The record is what it is. Which of these 7 houses would you never spend the night in? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more of this, more history, more documentation, more of what the tours don't tell you, subscribe. The doors are still open.